The more I am learning about it, both personally and in my line of work as a book launch account manager, I am really astounded at how complicated the publishing process is. Through a lot of the research that I've done, I didn't really feel like some of my bigger questions were answered because as a new writer, an aspiring author, I wanted to know what my role in the publishing process was. And a lot of the websites I was visiting, a lot of the FAQs I was reviewing, it didn't really answer that question. So having done the research, having done the work, and now in a job that works with authors to promote and market their book, I feel like I've kind of come up with a fairly good outline of how it works and what the role of a new or aspiring author is within the traditional publishing process. So we're going to be going over that today. So step one, you want to write the book. And this can vary depending on what kind of genre you're writing in. So I know nonfiction better than I know fiction. And I know that for fiction, you don't necessarily have to have the book written. It never really hurts to have a couple sample chapters. But I think with fiction, it's more about creating the book proposal. But I'm going to be speaking more from the perspective of like nonfiction narrative, kind of stuff, because my specialty is in memoir, which of course happens to be like the hardest genre. And according to Stephen King, who is like known for just churning out one book after another, he says it shouldn't take more than one season to write. But he's also a guy whose actual career is to write books, so he's got a lot of time on his hands. But I would say generally it should take about a year or less. And of course, a lot of this depends on your personal circumstances. Maybe you're a parent, maybe you're a student, maybe you're retired, maybe you've got a lot of kids, maybe you only have one kid, maybe you're just a pet parent, there's a lot of contributing factors that determine when you're going to finish writing your manuscript. And this may or may not count any pre-planning that needs to be done, particularly if you're writing fiction or if you're doing something that is nonfiction, like a cookbook, anything that requires a certain expertise on something that requires research. But after the book is written or as you're writing it, it is also your job to be your own editor, be your own audience in a way, your ideal avatar, because that's ultimately who you're writing for. Who is the person you have in your mind who would really benefit from reading this book? And you want to keep that in the back of your mind as you're editing, as you're revising, as you're proofreading, as you're going over your entire manuscript, because it's impossible to write a book the first try and have it be good. That's impossible. That's cheating. And I always say that a first draft is meant to be made, never read. When I think of my first draft, it makes me want to cringe and throw it into the sun and watch it burn because it's that bad. So when you make your first draft, you want to put it aside, kind of let it marinate. I don't know. You just want to let it set, get a clear mind, come back to it a couple weeks later, a month later, however much time you need, and then you can start kind of combing through it and just kind of cleaning it up around the edges a little bit. I think I've written three drafts of my book because I truly have no idea what I'm doing. I don't know how to write a book. I'm just doing what I think is best. I don't even know if 3 drafts is normal, but that's what I've done. So it's your job to write the book and then edit, clean up, revise the book as best you can to your ability. If you want to outsource different types of editors, I know developmental editors are really useful. That's just the overall arc of your book, the actual narrative, how it reads. That can be expensive, but it's something that I know is pretty common to invest in. That's something I would like to do, but I don't have the money yet because I just got out of grad school. I just started a full-time job, so I have no money. But it is on my list. The second thing you want to do is, if you're new or if you're switching or whatever, you want to look into agents. You don't necessarily need an agent if you're going to publish traditionally, but if you're looking at medium to larger size publishing companies, it's best to have some sort of reputation. If you're going smaller, more mom and pop kind of publishing places, you don't necessarily need representation. But for medium and larger companies, they rarely accept unsolicited manuscripts when you're submitting your materials, which is a whole other, bag of chips, because each agent and agency has their own submission guidelines. So that's a much deeper topic for another day. So yeah, when I say the word querying agents, that means it's kind of like writing a cover letter. If you've written a college admissions essay, if you've written a cover letter for a job, it's the same thing. You're basically pitching your book, cold calling to these people and their different agencies and giving them a taste of your book in hopes that they're going to reach out to you and request more materials. When they request more materials, that doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to get on board with you. It just means that they're curious and they want to know what else you have. And you can find agents in a number of ways. You can find them online. You can find them at conferences. If you're one of the lucky ones and you have connections or people who know people, you can reach out that way. Oh, and social media. I really don't use Twitter that much. I probably should. But I've heard that a lot of authors, agents, stuff like that, use a lot of the hashtags on Twitter. I think there's like a pitch war or a pitch thingy that happens annually on Twitter. I'm not entirely sure. That's what I've heard. But I've heard a lot of stuff about authors going on Twitter to seek out agents. You can also, I think there's like a specific hashtag I'll plug in somewhere, but it's like, you know, ideal manuscript or like manuscript wish list. I think that's what it's called, manuscript wish list. But that's a hashtag that a lot of people use to get discovered. So yeah, a query letter basically explains who you are, what your book is about, and why you're the person to write it. So in that way, you have to be pretty self-aware. You know, you have to be willing to put yourself out there, advocate for yourself, and have a really clear idea of what your message is, who your target audience is, and what the big thing is that anyone needs to know about you and or your book. But ultimately, if I had to summarize it, there's 3 things that you're trying to convince your agent of, or just any agent. You want to convince them that your book, your idea, your story has a market, meaning it's going to be bought. It has a target audience, that there are specific people out there who will read your book, because there's no such thing as a book that's made for everyone. And 3, it has potential for growth, or it's going to be successful because it satisfies the market or a trend. Pretty much, if there's anything you need to know about publishing, is that it's very, very closely linked with the market. The market influences what's published, and what's published influences what the market wants. So it's like a chicken and the egg thing. Third, your goal is to get accepted by an agent. So like I said, if you query an agent, send them a letter and they're like, hey, actually, if you could send me your whole manuscript, that would be great. Or like send me, you know, some other, like a sample chapter or a whole book proposal or something, you know, whatever, depending on the genre. When they request materials from you, that does not necessarily mean that you both are going to start working together. It just means they're curious. It's like they want a free trial before like actually diving in and, you know, representing you. So based on what I know, I'm no expert, but based on what I know, if you're nonfiction, they're going to request the whole manuscript if they haven't already, depending on what their submission guidelines are. If you're fiction, you're going to want some kind of book proposal, maybe a sample chapter or 2. I'm not so familiar with fiction, but I'm sure there's a lot of information out there. And when you do get accepted by an agent, when they're like, hey, I think this sounds great, I'd love to work with you, they should not be asking you about payment stuff, like how it works. Because if they're asking like, hey, so in order to get started, I need you to like pay me this amount of money, like you're getting scammed. That's not how it's supposed to work. Generally speaking, your agent sees you as an investment. And so depending on how well you've pitched yourself, if you've convinced them that you are a wise investment, they will agree to work with you, because if you get paid, they get paid. Generally speaking, they take about 15% of whatever profits you make off the book. So this is where a lot of the important stuff starts to happen. After an agent agrees to work with you, you're involved in a partnership, they are going to start reaching out, working from the top of their list down to all of the publishers and acquisitions editors that they have in their network in order to convince them on your behalf that your book is worth investing in. So it's kind of like you got 2 doors to get through. And once you get through and a publisher's like, yeah, I think this sounds great, this has a lot of potential, this is where you're going to sit down with everyone, which is why you want an agent, and talk about everything related to your rights and your contracts. You're going to be doing a lot of negotiating, because when you publish traditionally, you lose a lot of your autonomy. You sign over a fair amount of your rights. That's the part I'm not super familiar with, but this is a conversation you absolutely want to be available for. Now, when you're talking about rights, you got 2 different kinds that you're talking about. You got primary rights and secondary rights. When you're talking about primary rights, this is kind of like all the different formats of a book. Is it going to be a trade edition? Are there going to be digital formats like an ebook or a Kindle version? Are there going to be mass market editions? When it comes to secondary rights, think of like J.K. Rowling or Stephanie Meyers. Is your book so successful that it can be turned into a movie or a TV show series? Is it going to be translated? Is it going to be turned into an audiobook? These are all really important questions to ask and get answers to. So in addition to your rights, you're also going to be negotiating percentages of like how much of your profits that the publishing house is going to take. You're also going to be talking about any advances that you might get. So the bigger the publisher, the larger the advance. And an advance is basically a signing bonus. So for example, if you're like fiction and you haven't written your book, they're going to pay you an advance in order to finish the book. It's kind of like a pre-publishing sort of like incentive kind of thing. You're also going to be going over publishing deadlines, because when you're working with a medium to larger size traditional publishing press, you're going to have a whole in-house team that is going to be working on your book. So there's going to be a lot of different timelines for a lot of different teams to meet. You're going to have the editing team. You're going to have the production team. You're going to have the team that does a lot of the marketing and like making your book cover and stuff. On average, if you publish traditionally, depending on the size, it'll take you about 18 months. So if you're self-publishing or if you're with a smaller publisher, because it's just you or a very, very small number of people, that timeline moves a lot quicker. But because larger publishing houses have a much larger client base, it's gonna take longer. So I hope you're a patient person. Oh, and one important thing to know is that there's gonna be a lot of stuff that's outside of your control, which is why it's so important to be present during those important conversations. Because, for example, you most likely will not have any say over your book cover design. So, for example, if you're with one of the lucky ones, Penguin Random House, which is a top 5 publisher, they're not going to ask you, what do you think of this cover? They're going to say, this is your cover, and you have to be okay with that. Now, once you're signed on and all of the in-house team gets to work, this is kind of where the actual publishing process starts. And this is what a lot of the articles that I read, like, this is like where they started. Like, okay, you're assigned to the publisher. Here are the various steps in the publishing process. And it's like, that doesn't talk about all the previous stuff and all the work and homework and education and blood, sweat, and tears that comes before that. You're going to have an in-house editing team that further develops the narrative of the story. They're going to be doing developmental editing, they're going to be doing copy editing, they're going to be doing line editing. There's like 5 different kinds of editing, and I don't have them all memorized, but those are some examples. So the goal of this stage is to prepare the book for design and production for those teams. Now, when it comes to design work, that's what you're thinking of is probably accurate. You're going to be going over like book cover designs, just general aesthetic, how the book is going to be presented. They will choose a typeface or a font that best fits the subject of the book. They're going to create a book jacket, creating, whether it's going to be a hardback or a paper copy. A lot of it has to do with formatting as well. And after that, it's going to get shipped off to the production team, which is where they physically, actually, literally make the book. They determine the page layout, the page thickness, the binding style. I didn't even know that there were binding styles, as well as what kind of printer to use. And there are different printer schedules. So if you're a newer author that's self-published, you would maybe print on demand, which means that you only print when people want the books. But if you're traditional, then it's assumed that your book is going to sell. So they're going to print a bunch of these copies in advance. They'll most likely be stored in a warehouse somewhere so that anytime retailers or bookshops or whatever want more, like they can just pull it from the warehouse. Next is marketing and distribution. This has to do with the hardest part of the whole process, which is getting people to care, getting people to actually go out of their way to buy your book and read it. And unfortunately, most authors are totally clueless when it comes to this part of the process, which is luckily what my line of work is, working as a book launch account manager, where you're promoting it, you're marketing it, you're identifying your avatar, who is going to read your book, the avatar, the ideal person that you originally wrote for. You're going to be talking about relationship management, leveraging your network in your community, whoever's in your inner and outer circles. So I've got a list of different ways that a book is marketed, and I'm going to have to look down for this. So I'll just read those off. It can be accomplished through book launches, which is known as priming the audience for the actual release of the book, sending out advanced reader copies or ARCs, creating promotional items, videos, bonuses for buying the book, creating and distributing social media posts, that's very important, booking the author for different tours, if it's regional, if it's cross-country, if it's international. Getting endorsements is also really important, which is just basically getting recommendations from celebrities, influencers, people who have more social proof or like social validation than you, and whether or not it is a goal of yours to make it on a bestseller list. That could be Amazon, that could be USA Today, that could be Wall Street, that could be the big one, the New York Times, which I recently made a video on the shocking truth behind how a book becomes a New York Times bestseller. So I encourage you to check that out. I'll put it up here somewhere. And then we have distribution, which is like getting the book to the places, making it available for people to buy. So when you're thinking of this, you're most likely thinking of Barnes and Noble. And if you are going to get into Barnes and Noble, which is a really tough thing to do, getting your book into actual bookstores, you are expected to sell around 10,000 copies in order to sort of like validate the reason for being in the bookstore in the first place. And lastly, you're going to want to focus on getting publicity, which is like a lot of those reviews, kind of building that sort of social momentum, getting, building an audience behind your book, leveraging that audience and directing them to all the different channels of your work you want them to visit. Like if you have a business, that's actually a lot of the work that I do with clients in my line of work is they write a book, market it, promote it in order to drive attention to their business. So that's absolutely one way to do it. You can also do speaking events. You could do workshops. You could do master classes. You could do strategic partnerships, just general social media expansion. So if there's anything that you need to take away from the traditional publishing process, it is that there are two things that are very, very, very important, probably more so than the actual book. One is networking, meaning that you're sustaining and nurturing and maintaining any relationships that you have, existing, new ones, whatever, and platform. You don't necessarily need a platform to promote your book, but it definitely helps. Because if you're wanting to get traditionally published, they want to know that you're going to be able to market your book on your own without their help. They want to make sure that you're a sure thing. So it helps to have a solid social network behind you. Anyway, that's all I have. Thank you for taking a chance on someone with minimal subscribers. Be sure to check out some of my other videos and visit my website. It's very similar to the content you see on here related to writing and publishing processes, what that looks like. I also have a weekly newsletter that goes out with blog updates, so you should go check that out. I think that's it. So I will see you next time.